my stepfather declared. As of today, you are completely invisible to me and your mother. 4 years later, I systematically dismantled his entire life. It happened the very first week Garrett officially moved into our house in Seattle. I looked at my mom, desperately waiting for her to intervene, to defend me, to tell him to pack his bags and get out. Instead, she stared firmly at the floor and muttered. Garrett and I discussed it extensively. We need to channel all our emotional and financial resources into his son, Connor. Connor has severe anxiety and needs absolute stability right now. My dad had been gone for exactly 14 months. I was 17 years old, drowning in grief and needing just a shred of parental support. You're resilient, she whispered. You've always been the independent one. Garrett crossed his arms over his chest. So, starting right now, you are a financial ghost in this house. No gas money, no groceries, no help with your college applications or insurance. If you come to us whining with a problem, the answer is absolutely zero. Mom, I pleaded, my voice cracking. He's literally forbidding you from being my parent. She let out that specific, exasperated sigh, the exact one she used when signaling I was being a dramatic burden. I stared at her, begging silently without saying another word. She looked away. Fine, I choked out. I'll survive without either of you. Garrett smirked. That's a good kid. A month later, I got home from my late shift at the hardware store and walked toward the detached garage. The garage was my absolute sanctuary. My dad and I had spent 6 grueling years in there, slowly restoring a 1971 Chevrolet Chevelle. The engine block was entirely rebuilt. We had custom machined the pistons ourselves over countless weekends. When I opened the side door, the Chevelle was completely gone. The heavy steel workbenches were shoved into the alley. Connor was standing on the bare concrete floor, directing 2 guys carrying massive studio speakers. What the hell is this? I demanded. Connor grinned smugly. Podcast studio. Dad said the garage was wasted space. Where is the car? I asked, my hands shaking violently. Scrapyard down on 4th Avenue. He shrugged, checking his phone. Some guy brought a flatbed and gave us $1,200 for the scrap metal. Dad said it was just a rusted pile of junk anyway. My vision literally went black for a second. That car wasn't just metal and oil. Behind the passenger seat, my dad had meticulously welded a small steel plate engraved with both our initials and the exact date we finally got the engine to turn over. It was the last genuinely good day we shared before his massive heart attack. Connor didn't even care about the loss. To him, a decade of my father's love was just quick cash for soundproofing foam. I stormed into the house. Garrett was on the couch, drinking a beer and watching golf. You sold my car? He didn't even flinch. Connor's space now. Your father is dead. That car was a massive money pit. You need to stop using a corpse as an excuse to hold this family back from evolving. He sat in a living room my father paid for, watching a television my father bought, telling me I was toxic for grieving him. I spent the next 3 years becoming a machine. I worked full-time at a logistics center while finishing high school. I paid for my own food, my own winter coats, and my own dental bills. The single thing keeping me sane and upright was the $75,000 life insurance payout my dad had legally earmarked for my commercial pilot training. In October of my sophomore year of college, I needed to wire the first $20,000 installment to the Aviation Academy. I asked my mom to authorize the release. She instantly started crying. Things got so extremely complicated after the funeral, she sobbed. Garrett stepped out of the kitchen, casually drying his hands. That money was reallocated into the primary household trust, he stated plainly. We had an emergency. Reallocated into what? Connor's legal defense. Connor had drunkenly crashed his heavy-duty truck into a commercial storefront last spring. The $75,000 went entirely to expensive lawyers and out-of-court settlements to keep his spoiled son out of a county jail cell. I stared at my mother in pure disgust. He spent Dad's money to save his criminal son. She covered her face, weeping louder. We are one family now. We had to protect him. Garrett scoffed loudly. Your dad isn't here to pay for your little flying hobby. The money is gone. Figure it out yourself. You're a survivor, right? You always land on your feet. I didn't scream. I didn't punch a hole in the drywall to give them the exact unhinged reaction they expected. I simply looked at them and calmly said, you wanted me to be independent. Watch me. I walked out the front door with a duffel bag of clothes and my dad's old leather jacket. I slept in my 2008 Honda Civic for 11 days in the parking lot behind the logistics center. Every morning, I woke up at 4:30 a.m., splashed cold water on my face in the employee restroom, and clocked in for a 10-hour shift loading pallets. A guy on the morning shift, Kit, noticed I was wearing the same jeans 3 days in a row. He didn't ask for a sob story. He just handed me a spare key to his cramped apartment on Beacon Hill and said I could take the couch if I chipped in $200 for utilities. I took the couch. I took every overtime shift available, but I refused to let Garrett and my mother kill the only thing my dad wanted from me. I found a small, struggling municipal airfield about 40 miles south of the city. The chief flight instructor was a guy named Arlo. He was in his late 50s, constantly stressed and drowning in administrative paperwork and hangar maintenance. I walked into his office on a Tuesday afternoon and laid out a proposal. I would clean the hangars, wash the planes, organize his logbooks, and do all the heavy lifting his business required, completely off the books. In exchange, I wanted flight hours, no cash, just time in the cockpit. Arlo looked at my calloused hands, then at my eyes. He agreed. For the next 2 years, my life was a brutal, relentless cycle. Monday through Friday, I moved freight at the logistics center. Saturday and Sunday, I scrubbed oil stains off concrete floors, tightened spark plugs, and vacuumed out Cessnas until my back ached. But I was flying. I earned my private pilot license, then my instrument rating. When I turned 20, it was time to push for my multi-engine commercial rating. I couldn't barter my way through that. The fuel and insurance costs were too high. I needed a $30,000 student loan. The bank required 3 years of tax history to prove independent status, which meant I needed the physical tax documents from the years I was 17 and 18. Documents that were still sitting in a filing cabinet in the house my dad bought. I knew their schedule. Garrett played golf every Thursday morning with his buddies from the country club. My mother ran a neighborhood book club at a local bakery. The house would be empty from 9 p.m. to 1 p.m. I parked 3 streets over and walked through the alley, entering through the side gate. The podcast studio in the garage had already been abandoned. Through the window, I could see empty energy drink cans and a layer of dust over expensive microphones. Connor's attention span had lasted less than 6 months. months. I let myself in through the back door with my old key. The house smelled different. Stale. The expensive hardwood floors my dad had laid by hand were scuffed and unpolished. I walked straight to the home office. Garrett had claimed my dad's mahogany desk. It was buried under piles of unopened mail, bank statements, and legal pads. I opened the bottom drawer to look for the old tax files. I found my returns neatly in a manila folder in the back. But as I pulled the folder out, a thick stack of papers slipped off the top of the pile and spilled onto the floor. The top sheet had a glaring red header. It was a pre-foreclosure notice from a private lending firm. I froze. I picked it up and started reading. The notice was addressed to Garrett and my mother. It cited a severe delinquency on a $150,000 home equity line of credit. My dad had paid off the mortgage on this house 5 years before he died. We owned it free and clear. I started digging frantically through the rest of the pile. I found bank statements, wire transfers, and LLC registration documents. The $75,000 from my dad's life insurance didn't go to Connor's lawyers. I found the settlement papers for Connor's Dewey. The victim had agreed to a $12,000 out-of-court payout. The lawyers cost another $8,000. That was 20 grand. Where did the other $55,000 go? I tracked the account numbers on Garrett's messy printouts. He had wired the rest of my dad's insurance money into an LLC registered under his name. I pulled out my phone and searched the business name. It was a franchise group for a chain of boutique fitness centers that had aggressively expanded and filed for bankruptcy 8 months ago. Garrett hadn't drained my dad's money to save his son. He used his son's crime as a convenient cover story to steal my inheritance and sink it into a failed business venture. And when that wasn't enough, he took out a massive loan against the house my dad built, and he was currently defaulting on it. I took photos of everything, every statement, every transfer, every default notice. The next day, I texted my mother, "Meet me at the diner on 15th Ave, 2 p.m., just you." She showed up looking tired. Her hair wasn't styled, and she was nervously picking at her cuticles. She ordered a black coffee and wouldn't look me in the eye. "I don't have long," she muttered. "Garrett likes dinner on the table by 6, and I still need to go to the grocery store." I didn't say a word. I slid the printed photos of the bank statements and the pre-foreclosure notice across the sticky diner table. She glanced down. Her breath hitched, but she didn't act surprised. She just looked incredibly weary. "Garrett is stealing from you," I said, keeping my voice low and perfectly steady. "He stole my money, and now he's leveraged Dad's house. You're going to lose the house, Mom. He's bankrupting you." She pushed the papers back toward me without picking them up. Her hands were shaking. "You don't understand how business works," she whispered defensively. "Garrett is an entrepreneur. The market took a bad turn. He's restructuring the debt. It's under control." "He lied to me," I shot back. "He told me he spent 75 grand on Connor. He spent it on a failed gym franchise." Her eyes hardened, a sudden, irrational anger flaring up to mask her fear. "He is the head of our household. He makes the financial decisions. You have always hated him. You sneaked into our house just to dig up dirt and try to ruin my marriage. You are so bitter, just like your father's side of the family." She stood up, throwing a $5 bill on the table. "Don't contact me again unless you're ready to apologize to my husband." I watched her walk out of the diner. A cold, heavy realization settled into my chest. I couldn't save her. She had chosen her delusion, and she would ride it all the way to the bottom. If she wouldn't protect my father's legacy, I would. I took the photos to a free legal aid clinic downtown on Thursday afternoon. The counselor assigned to me was a sharp, exhausted-looking guy named Caden Locke. He spent 20 minutes reviewing the documents, highlighting dates and account numbers in silence. "Okay," Caden finally said, leaning back in his chair. "Your stepfather is a terrible businessman, but draining the life insurance might technically be legal, depending on how the trust was structured when you were a minor. Your mother had broad discretionary power as your guardian. So, he gets away with it?" I asked, my jaw tight. "I didn't say that." Caden tapped his pen against the printed copy of the HELOC agreement. "Look at this signature line. Your mother's name is on the deed, which means she had to sign off on this second mortgage. Look at the date." I leaned in. The date on the signature was October 14th of last year. "I know my mother's handwriting," I said. "That's not her signature. The loops on the M are completely wrong." "Exactly," Caden said. "And if you look at the notary stamp, it belongs to a guy whose license was suspended 2 years ago for processing fraudulent real estate transactions. Your stepfather forged your mother's signature to take out a $150,000 loan against a house he doesn't own. That's not bad business. That's felony wire fraud and bank fraud." He looked at me over the rim of his glasses. "If you take this to the fraud department of the issuing bank, they will immediately freeze the asset, trigger a criminal investigation, and call in the loan. Garrett will be looking at federal charges." I felt a dark, quiet thrill in my chest. This was it, the kill shot. I thanked Caden, took my files, and spent the entire weekend organizing everything into a heavily documented package. I found the direct contact for the bank's regional fraud investigator. All I had to do was drop the envelope in the mail on Monday morning. But on Monday at noon, my supervisor at the logistics center tapped me on the shoulder. "Hey, someone's waiting for you out by the loading dock. Says it's an emergency." I walked out into the cold, overcast afternoon. Standing next to the dumpsters, shivering in a thin hoodie, was Connor. He looked awful. He had lost weight, his skin was pale, and his hands were jammed deep into his pockets. He didn't have the smug, entitled smirk he wore the day he sold my dad's car. He looked like a cornered animal. "What do you want, Connor?" I asked, keeping my distance. He swallowed hard. "Garrett kicked me out. We got into a huge fight last night. The bank is calling the house nonstop. He's totally out of his mind, screaming at your mom, throwing things. Sounds like a family problem," I said coldly. "You shouldn't have come here." "Wait," Connor stepped forward, his voice cracking. "I need money. Just a couple $100. I know you hate me, but I have nowhere else to go. My dad is going to jail." I froze. "What are you talking about?" "The loan," Connor whispered, looking around nervously as if someone was watching us. "He faked the signatures to get the money for the gyms. The bank sent an auditor to the house on Friday to verify the primary borrower." I felt a surge of triumph. The bank was already catching on. My package would just be the final nail. "Good," I said. "He deserves to rot." Connor shook his head frantically. "No, you don't understand. When the auditor showed up, Garrett panicked. He took your mom into the kitchen and told her that if she didn't cover for him, he would pack his bags that night, leave her with the debt, and she would go to prison for participating in the gym's finances." My stomach dropped. "What did she do?" "She lied to the auditor," Connor said miserably. "She sat at the dining room table, looked the bank guy right in the eye, and signed a sworn, retroactive affidavit stating that she had authorized the original loan and that the signature on file was hers. She legally took ownership of the fraud to protect him. I stared at Connor, the chill of the overcast afternoon suddenly seeping deep into my bones. She chained herself to a sinking ship just so Garrett wouldn't have to drown alone. She signed an affidavit? I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. Connor nodded, rubbing his arms. Yeah, the bank guy warned her. He said, "Ma'am, if you sign this, you are acknowledging full financial responsibility for the line of credit." Garrett was standing right behind her, with his hands on her shoulders. She just took the pen and signed it. My jaw ached from how hard I was clenching it. Garrett hadn't just stolen my inheritance, he had weaponized my mother's pathetic desperation to keep him around. He used her as a human shield. So why are you here? I snapped at Connor. He won, didn't he? He's off the hook. Because he's still losing his mind, Connor pleaded. The gyms are completely liquidated, but there are other creditors. He's furious at me because I told him to just declare bankruptcy, and he threw a coffee mug at my head and told me to get out. I don't have a car, I don't have a job, I just need a place to crash. I looked at the guy who had gleefully sold my father's restored Chevelle for pocket change so he could buy soundproofing foam for a podcast that lasted 3 months. Go sleep in the podcast studio, I said. I can't get into the garage, Connor whined. He changed the codes. Then sleep in the alley, I said, turning my back on him and walking toward the loading dock doors. You're resilient. You'll land on your feet. I clocked out of my shift 2 hours early, taking the penalty hit on my paycheck, and sat in my Civic. I dialed Caden Locke's direct line at the legal clinic. He picked up on the 4th ring, sounding just as exhausted as he had on Thursday. I laid it out for him. The auditor, the threat, the retroactive affidavit. Caden swore softly under his breath. Okay, that changes the entire landscape. If she signed a sworn statement in front of a bank official verifying that signature is hers, she just vaporized your forgery claim. The bank isn't going to spend resources doing handwriting analysis if the primary account holder is literally waving her hand in the air, claiming ownership of the debt. She was under duress, I argued, gripping the steering wheel. He told her he'd leave her and pin the gym's financial fraud on her. Proving duress requires her to testify against him, Caden said flatly. Will she do that? I closed my eyes. No. Then right now, legally, she is a co-conspirator who just confessed. If you push the fraud department to investigate now, they aren't going to arrest Garrett. They're going to arrest her. She obstructed a financial audit and took ownership of a fraudulent loan. The federal prosecutor will see her as the low-hanging fruit. My stomach twisted into a hard knot. So what does Garrett get out of this? Time, Caden said. With the fraud flag removed by her affidavit, the bank will just treat it as a standard delinquency. They'll proceed with the foreclosure. Garrett will likely force a quick sale of the house, use the equity to pay off the HELOC and his most aggressive creditors, and walk away clean. Your mother takes the credit hit, the house is gone, and he avoids federal prison. He's going to sell my dad's house, I said, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. He's probably already talking to realtors, Caden warned. I'm sorry, kid. Unless she flips, your hands are tied. I hung up and sat in the quiet of my car. The rain started to hit the windshield, blurring the gray Seattle skyline. I drove straight to the local bakery in Queen Anne. It was 4 p.m. on a Monday, the exact time my mother usually wrapped up her neighborhood book club. I parked across the street and watched the large front windows. Sure enough, 15 minutes later, she walked out with a woman I recognized vaguely from my childhood, Hester, a retired nurse who lived 2 streets over from our house. My mother looked terrible. She was wearing a heavy trench coat that seemed too big for her, and she kept looking over her shoulder as she walked toward her Subaru. I got out of my car and crossed the street, intercepting her right as she reached for her door handle. Mom, she jumped, dropping her keys onto the wet pavement. Hester stopped, looking between us with mild concern. Everything okay? Hester asked. It's fine, Hester, my mother said quickly, her voice tight and breathless. I'll see you next week. Hester nodded slowly and walked away, leaving us alone on the sidewalk. My mother bent down to pick up her keys, but her hands were trembling so badly she couldn't get a grip on them. I reached down, picked them up, and held them out to her. She snatched them from my hand. I told you not to contact me, she hissed, refusing to look me in the eye. Connor came to see me today, I said. She froze, the key halfway to the lock. He told me about the auditor, I continued, keeping my voice low so the people walking past wouldn't hear. He told me you signed an affidavit taking the fall for Garrett's forgery. Connor is a liar and a deeply troubled boy, she said mechanically, as if reciting a script Garrett had drilled into her head. There was no forgery. I authorized the loan. I just forgot because I was so overwhelmed with grief. Grief from a year ago? I asked. You signed a paper to protect a man who stole the money Dad left for me, and now he's going to sell the house. She finally looked up at me. Her eyes were red-rimmed and completely devoid of whatever light used to be in them. We are downsizing, she said, her voice shaking. The house is too big for just the 2 of us now. Garrett has a very smart real estate agent coming tomorrow to list the property. We're going to pay off the line of credit, and we're moving to Arizona. Garrett has a friend there who is getting him into property management. It's a fresh start. He's running away from his creditors, and he's using Dad's equity to buy his ticket out, I said. Mom, if you let him sell that house, you will have absolutely nothing left. When the money runs out in Arizona, he will leave you. You know he will. Stop it, she cried, stepping back against the car door. You don't know him. He loves me. He's under a lot of pressure, and I am his wife. I stand by him. He threatened to send you to prison. He was panicking. She fired back, tears finally spilling over her cheeks. You cornered him. You went to the bank and tried to ruin him, and you forced his hand. This is your fault. I stared at her. The sheer magnitude of her delusion was suffocating. She was blaming me for the fact that her husband committed fraud. Tomorrow, I said quietly. The realtor comes tomorrow? At noon, she said, wiping her face aggressively. And I don't want you there. You have no legal claim to the property. If you show up, Garrett will call the police. She unlocked her car, got in, and slammed the door. I watched her drive away, the taillights bleeding into the wet, gray afternoon. I went back to Kit's apartment on Beacon Hill. Kit was sitting on the floor in front of the TV, eating ramen out of a styrofoam cup and playing a video game. He glanced up when I walked in, took one look at my face, and paused the game. You look like you're about to murder someone or throw up, Kit said. My stepdad is selling my dad's house tomorrow to cover the bank fraud he committed, I said, dropping my duffel bag on the floor. He's fast-tracking a sale so he can skip town with my mom before the rest of his creditors catch up with him. Kit set his noodles down. Can you stop the sale? My name isn't on the deed, I said, sinking onto the couch. It passed entirely to my mom when Dad died. She has the right to sell it, and since she just swore to the bank that she authorized the HELOC, there's no active fraud investigation to freeze the asset. I put my head in my hands. The house was the last piece of my father I had had left. The floors he laid, the kitchen cabinets we painted together, the concrete in the garage where we restored the Chevelle. Garrett was going to liquidate all of it, hand the cash to the bank, and walk away. I needed a way to stall the sale. I needed to make that house radioactive so no buyer would touch it, at least until I could figure out how to untangle my mother from Garrett's legal mess. I pulled out my laptop and started searching property law, foreclosure rules, and real estate loopholes in King County. I spent 3 hours reading dense legal jargon, looking for anything that could put a freeze on a title transfer without requiring a police report. At 9 p.m., my phone buzzed. It was an unknown number. I answered it. Hello? Is this the kid who cleans Arlo's hangars? A gruff voice asked. I frowned. Who is this? My name is Thad, the man said. I own the twin-engine Piper Navajo parked in Hangar 4. Arlo says you know how to keep your mouth shut and you work cheap. I sat up straight. Thad was one of the wealthiest guys at the municipal airfield. He ran a private logistics contracting company and used the Navajo for regional corporate hops. He was notoriously paranoid and barely spoke to anyone. I work hard. I corrected him. What do you need? I've got a problem with my aircraft title, Thad said. An old mechanic I fired 2 years ago just slapped a mechanic's lien on my plane. Claims I owe him 10 grand in unpaid invoices from 2023. It's total bullshit, but because the lien is filed with the county, I can't legally sell the plane to a buyer I have lined up in Portland. The asset is frozen until the lien is resolved in court, which could take months. My blood ran completely cold. I stopped breathing for a second. A mechanic's lien. Are you still there, kid? Thad asked. Yeah, I breathed. Yeah, I'm here. Thad, I can clean the Piper tomorrow night, but I need you to explain exactly how that mechanic filed the lien. He just went to the county recorder's office, Thad grumbled, filled out a form claiming he did uncompensated labor on the property. It costs like $50 to file. The county doesn't even verify if the invoice is real before they attach it to the title. It's a legal extortion tactic. Thank you, I said, my heart hammering against my ribs. I'll see you tomorrow. I hung up and looked at Kit, who was watching me with raised eyebrows. Kit, I said, do you remember when I spent my entire junior year of high school replacing the entire roof and rebuilding the back deck of my dad's house? Kit frowned. Yeah, you showed me the calluses. You did it all yourself. I did, I said. I acted as the sole contractor, and my stepfather never paid me for my labor. Kit stared at me, the styrofoam cup dangling loosely from his fingers. You're going to put a lien on your own mother's house? Garrett's house. I corrected him. At least, that's how he treats it. And yeah, I am. I stayed up until 3:00 Luroam drafting the invoice. My dad had taught me to be meticulous about construction. Before he died, we had drawn up the plans for the roof and the deck expansion together. He had already purchased the lumber and the architectural shingles, but after his heart attack, the materials just sat in the driveway under a tarp. When Garrett moved in, he complained endlessly about the eyesore in the yard and told me to either finish the job or pay someone to haul it to the dump. I spent that entire summer on the roof, burning my shoulders, driving nails until my hands bled. Garrett sat inside in the air conditioning watching golf. I billed my labor at the standard regional contractor rate for the year the work was completed. 320 hours of skilled carpentry and roofing. I added the standard late fees and interest accrued over 3 years. The total came to $24,800. At 8:00 a.m. on Tuesday, I was standing at the counter of the King County recorder's office. The clerk, a bored-looking woman with heavy eyeliner, barely glanced at the paperwork. I handed her my debit card, paid the $60 filing fee, and watched her stamp the document. With one hard thud of a rubber stamp, a $24.800 encumbrance was legally attached to the title of my father's house. I went to work. I loaded pallets of industrial solvent, my phone sitting quietly in my pocket. I knew the timeline. The realtor was showing up at noon. Standard practice for a fast-tracked sale meant pulling a preliminary title report immediately to check for any red flags that could delay escrow. At 1:45 p.m., my phone started vibrating violently against my leg. The caller ID was Garrett. I let it ring out. He called right back. I let it go to voicemail. 3 minutes later, a text came through. Pick up the damn phone. Then another. You think you're smart? I'm calling the police for extortion. Then my mother called. I stepped away from the loading dock and answered it. What did you do? She sobbed into the receiver. What is wrong with you? I filed an unpaid invoice, I said calmly. It's standard contractor procedure. Garrett's real estate agent just pulled the title. She cried. Jasper told us we can't list the house. He said it's legally frozen. Garrett is throwing things in the kitchen. He threw a chair at the wall. Then Jasper is a good realtor, I said. Tell Garrett to write me a check for $24,800 and I'll sign the release form. Garrett snatched the phone from her. Listen to me, you little piece of shit, he snarled, his voice vibrating with rage. You are going to march down to the county courthouse right now and remove this fraudulent garbage, or I will sue you into oblivion. It's not false, I said, leaning against the cold concrete wall of the warehouse. I have the stamped permits from the city, pulled under my name. I have the signed-off inspection reports. I have time-stamped photos of me doing the labor and text messages from you telling me to finish the work or you'd throw my tools away. I was 17, working as an unlicensed contractor under your direct supervision, which actually makes you liable for labor violations on top of the unpaid wages. You want to get lawyers involved, Garrett? Let's get everything on the record. The house, the gyms, the forged signature on the HELOC. Let's lay it all out. Silence on the other end. I could hear his heavy, ragged breathing. He was trapped, and for the first time in 4 years, he knew it. He couldn't sell the house without paying me off, and he couldn't pay me off because he was entirely broke. You're destroying this family, he whispered, venom dripping from every word. You declared me invisible 4 years ago, I replied. I'm just a ghost haunting your balance sheet. Pay the invoice, Garrett. I hung up. The feeling of power was intoxicating, but it was fragile. I knew a mechanic's lien was just a delay tactic. In Washington state, a lien is only valid for 8 months unless the claimant files a formal lawsuit to foreclose on the property. Garrett could just wait me out, or try to take out another predatory loan to pay me off and clear the title. I needed a permanent solution. I needed to separate my mother from his sinking ship before he dragged her down to the bottom of the ocean. I called Caden Locke back during my afternoon break. I bought us some time, I told him, explaining the lien. Caden actually let out a short, sharp laugh. That's incredibly petty and legally brilliant, but it doesn't solve the core problem. Your mom is still on the hook for the $150,000 bank fraud because of her affidavit. I know, I said. How do I break the affidavit? How do I prove she lied to the bank to protect him? You can't, Caden said, his tone turning serious again, unless you find hard proof proof that she wasn't physically capable of signing the original loan document on October 14th of last year. If you can prove she wasn't there when the HELOC was signed and notarized, the affidavit falls apart. It becomes obvious she's covering for him under duress, and the bank shifts the target back to Garrett and his fraudulent notary buddy. October 14th. I closed my eyes, trying to remember where I was a year ago. I was working at the logistics center and spending every weekend at the airfield. I rarely saw my mother. Wait, October 14th. I opened my eyes. Caden, what time was the loan document notarized? Let me check the file. I heard him shuffling papers. Looks like 11:30 am. My mother runs a book club, I said, my pulse accelerating. Every Thursday at a bakery in Queen Anne. October 14th was a Thursday. A book club isn't an alibi, Caden said. It's not an official record. No, but she's obsessive about it. She never misses a week, and she always posts a photo of the group on her Facebook page. I hung up and opened the social media app on my phone. My mother and I were still technically friends on the platform, though we hadn't interacted in years. I scrolled back, month after month of manicured garden photos, vague inspirational quotes, and pictures of Garrett holding up a beer at the golf course. I hit October of last year. There it was, a group selfie taken inside the bakery. 6 women holding up copies of a mystery novel. My mother was front and center, smiling brightly. I looked at the timestamp on the post. October 14, 11:45 am. But that wasn't enough. Social media posts can be delayed or scheduled. I zoomed in on the photo, looking for anything that tied it strictly to that exact moment in time. In the background, visible through the large glass window of the bakery, was a very distinct scene. A city bus was pulled over at the curb, and a massive, bright pink billboard on the side of the bus was advertising a local radio station's morning show contest. But right in front of the bus, a white commercial delivery van had rear-ended a silver sedan. 2 drivers were standing on the sidewalk, pointing at each other. It was a highly specific, documented traffic accident in the background of her photo. I screenshotted the image and sent it to Caden. Pull the police reports or insurance claims for a minor collision on Queen Anne Avenue on the morning of October 14th. If that accident happened at 11:30 am, my mom was taking a selfie 2 miles away from the house when that loan was supposedly signed in her living room. Caden texted back 10 minutes later. I just pulled the city traffic dispatch log. A collision between a bakery supply van and a Honda Accord was called in at 11:32. I'm right outside that cafe. The timestamp is locked. He followed it up with a second text. You have her. She physically couldn't have signed that document. Her affidavit is a perjury trap, and Garrett is the one who pushed her into it. I felt a cold wave of relief wash over me. The final piece of the puzzle had just clicked into place. I didn't just have enough to stall the sale. I had enough to trigger a federal investigation that Garrett couldn't talk his way out of. But before I could call Caden back to strategize the next move, my phone rang again. It was my mother. I answered. I'm not lifting the lien. It's not about the lien, she whispered. Her voice sounded hollow, completely drained of the frantic anger from an hour ago. It's Garrett. What about him? He left. I stopped walking. What do you mean he left? He packed 2 suitcases, she said, her voice trembling. He took the title to the Subaru and all the cash we had in the emergency safe. He said the house is ruined, the credit is ruined, and he can't go down for this. He just drove away. I let out a slow breath. The coward didn't even wait for the federal hammer to drop. The moment he realized the house was frozen and his golden parachute was gone, he abandoned her, just like I told her he would. Where did he go? I asked. I don't know, she sobbed, the reality of her situation finally shattering her delusion. He turned his phone off. He left me with everything. The bank called again 10 minutes ago. They're accelerating the foreclosure because of the title flag you triggered. I'm going to lose the house, and I have $50 in my checking account. I stood in the noisy warehouse, listening to the woman who had watched me get stripped of my inheritance, my car, and my father's memory completely break down. She was utterly alone, holding the bag for a man who had manipulated her into legal jeopardy. I need you, she pleaded, her voice cracking. Please, you're resilient. You always know how to fix things. Please help me. I looked at the concrete floor. 4 years ago, I had looked at her, begging silently for a shred of parental support, and she had stared at the floor and told me I was a financial ghost. I'll be there in an hour, I said. I didn't say it because I forgave her. I said it because I needed to get inside that house and secure my father's remaining assets before the bank locked the doors. I drove across the city, the rain finally letting up, leaving the streets slick and reflective. When I pulled up to the house, the front door was wide open. I walked in. The place was a disaster. Drawers were pulled out of the entryway console, papers were scattered across the floor, and a framed photo of Garrett and my mother at a resort in Cabo was smashed on the hardwood. He had ransacked the place, looking for anything pawnable before he fled. My mother was sitting on the living room floor, her knees pulled up to her chest, rocking slightly. He took my jewelry, she whispered, not looking up when I walked in. The pearl necklace your father bought me for our 10th anniversary. Garrett took it. Where is the paperwork for the HELOC? I asked, ignoring her tears. The original documents from the bank. Where are they? She pointed a shaky finger toward the home office. I walked in and started digging through the mess on Garrett's desk. I found the thick manila envelope from the lender. I pulled out the closing documents and laid them flat. I took photos of every page, specifically the notary stamp and the forged signature. I sent them all to Caden, along with the bakery selfie and the traffic accident timestamp. I have the proof, I texted him. Garrett fled. My mom is alone. We need to go to the fraud department tomorrow morning and get her immunity before they process the foreclosure. Bring her to my office at 9 am, Caden replied. If we hand them the forgery proof and the alibi simultaneously, we can shift the liability completely to Garrett. The bank will void the loan against the house and issue a warrant for his arrest for defrauding a financial institution. I walked back into the living room. My mother was still on the floor. Get up, I said. She looked up at me, her face pale and tear-stained. What? Get up, pack a bag. You're not staying here tonight. The bank could send a property preservation crew at any time if they think the house is abandoned, and Garrett might realize he left a paper trail and come back. I can't leave, she whimpered. This is my home. It's not your home anymore, I said coldly. You signed it away the second you let him treat me like a squatter. You're coming with me. We're going to a lawyer tomorrow, and you are going to tell the truth about the affidavit. She hesitated, clinging to the edge of the coffee table. If I tell them the truth, Garrett will go to prison, even now. Even after he stole her money, abandoned her, and robbed her of my father's pearls, she was still trying to protect him. If you don't tell the truth, I leaned down, looking her dead in the eye. You will go to prison for bank fraud, and I will not spend a single cent of my dad's money to bail you out. She She finally cracked. She let out a long, pathetic wail, pushed herself off the floor, and stumbled toward the bedroom. I stood in the center of the living room, looking around the house my father had built. The silence was heavy. I had won. I had systematically dismantled Garrett's safety net, exposed his fraud, and driven him out of the state. But as I waited for my mother to pack, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Arlo, the chief flight instructor at the airfield. Hey, you need to get down here right now. Somebody just vandalized Thad's Piper Navajo, smashed the instrument panel, and poured sugar in the fuel tanks. Thad is losing his mind. He found a baseball bat on the floor of the hangar with your initials carved into the handle. I read the text twice. My vision blurred at the edges for a fraction of a second before the cold, hard logic kicked back in. A baseball bat with my initials. It was the old Ashwood Louisville slugger my dad and I used to hit pop flies with at the park down the street. It used to sit in the corner of the detached garage, right next to the Chevelle's rolling tool chest. Connor, he didn't have anywhere to sleep. I had told him to sleep in the alley. He was desperate, angry, and he knew exactly where I spent every weekend because he used to make fun of my little airport hobby at the dinner table. He had broken into the hangar, trashed a $500,000 aircraft, and left a prop to make sure the police came knocking on my door. It was a stupid, impulsive, desperate move. Typical Connor. I hit the call button on Arlo's contact. He picked up on the first ring. Where are you? Arlo demanded, his voice thick with stress. In the background, I could hear Thad yelling at someone. I'm in the city, I said, my voice completely steady. Arlo, listen to me very carefully. Do not touch that bat. Tell Thad to back away from the plane and call the county sheriff right now. Thad already called them, Arlo said, breathing heavily. They're on the way. Kid, he's saying he's going to sue the flight school into the ground. He says you did this because of the mechanic's lien. I have been on the clock at the logistics center all day, I said. They have my time card. They have security footage of me on the loading dock until 2 hours ago. Before that, I was with a lawyer downtown. I have an ironclad alibi for every minute of today. The person who did this is my stepbrother. He stole that bat from my house. Arlo went quiet for a second. The yelling in the background subsided slightly. Your stepbrother? Yes. Tell the police to check the security cameras on the perimeter fence by Hangar 4. They're going to see a guy in his early 20s, thin, probably wearing a gray hoodie. His name is Connor, and he's currently homeless. I paused, looking down the hallway toward the master bedroom. I could hear my mother zipping up a suitcase. Just give the cops my number, Arlo. I'll give them a full statement. I'm not running from this. I hung up just as my mother walked out into the living room, dragging a floral print roller bag. She had put on a raincoat and was clutching her purse with both hands. She looked completely hollowed out. I'm ready, she whispered. Let's go, I said. I grabbed the manila envelope containing the original forged HELOC documents off the desk, locked the front door behind us, and led her to my Civic. The drive north on I-5 was agonizingly quiet. She stared out the passenger window at the passing headlights, crying silently. I didn't turn on the radio. I didn't offer any comforting words. There was no comfort to give. We were past the point of pretending this was a misunderstanding. This was a demolition. I didn't take her to Kit's apartment. I couldn't bring this level of toxic fallout to the guy who had given me a place to sleep when I had nothing. Instead, I pulled off the highway on Aurora Avenue and parked in front of a cheap, run-down motel with a flickering neon sign. I walked into the lobby and paid cash for 2 nights. The woman behind the bulletproof glass, a tired-looking clerk whose name tag read Vita, slid the plastic key card under the slot without making eye contact. I walked my mother to room 114. The room smelled like stale smoke and industrial carpet cleaner. The bedspread was a faded, depressing green. Don't leave this room, I told her, setting her suitcase by the door. Don't order food delivery to this address, and do not turn your phone on. If Garrett realizes the bank is closing in, he might try to call you to manipulate you into taking the fall again. You are a ghost tonight. Tomorrow at 8:30 a.m., I am coming to pick you up, and we are going straight to Caden Locke's office. She sat on the edge of the stiff bed, keeping her raincoat on. What if the bank is already looking for me? Then we beat them to the punch tomorrow, I said, stepping back into the doorway. Get some sleep. I shut the door and walked back to my car. As soon as I sat in the driver's seat, my phone lit up. It was an unknown number, but the area code was local. Hello, is this the kid? A deep voice asked. Depends on who's asking, I replied. This is Deputy Bowen with the King County Sheriff's Office. I'm standing in Hangar 4 at the municipal airfield with Arthur Arlo and Thaddeus Trask. You want to tell me why your initials are carved into the murder weapon used to execute a Piper Navajo's avionics panel? Because it's my bat, I said cleanly. It was stolen from my property in Seattle. Have you pulled the perimeter security footage yet, Deputy? We're pulling it right now, Bowen said, his tone skeptical but professional. Look for a young guy, brown hair, gray hoodie. His name is Connor. He's my stepbrother. He came to my workplace at noon today asking for money, and I told him to get lost. He's retaliating. You can pull my time cards at the Pacific Freight Logistics Center in Sodo. I was loading pallets from 4:30 a.m. until roughly 2 p.m. Then I was at a legal aid clinic downtown. There was a pause on the line. I heard the crackle of a police radio in the background. You're awfully calm for a guy whose boss is threatening to have him arrested, Bowen noted. I don't have time to panic, Deputy. I have a paper trail. If you find Connor on that tape, I want to press charges for the theft of the bat. Let's wait and see what the tape shows first, Bowen said. I'll be in touch. He hung up. I sat in the dark parking lot of the motel, watching the rain start to drizzle against my windshield again. Garrett was in the wind. Connor was spiraling into felony vandalism. My mother was sitting in a cheap motel room with her entire life shoved into a floral suitcase. I drove back to Kit's apartment, took a shower that felt like sandpaper against my exhausted skin, and lay down on the couch. I didn't sleep. I just watched the shadows move across the ceiling as the streetlights filtered through the blinds. At 8 a.m., I was back at the motel. I knocked on the door of 114. My mother answered it immediately. She was wearing the exact same clothes from yesterday. She hadn't slept either. We drove downtown in silence. Caden Locke's legal clinic was in a low-rent brick building near the courthouse. I had called him at 7 a.m. to give him the heads up. When we walked into his cramped office, he already had fresh coffee poured and 2 empty chairs waiting in front of his desk. Caden didn't offer any polite small talk. He looked at my mother over the rim of his glasses. Ma'am, Caden started, opening the manila folder I had left with him yesterday. Your son has provided me with evidence that places you miles away from your home at the exact minute your signature was supposedly witnessed and notarized on a $150,000 loan document. My mother stared at the desk, her hands folded tightly lightly in her lap. I also have copies of the original documents your son retrieved from your husband's desk yesterday, Caden continued, tapping a stack of printed photos. The notary seal on this document belongs to a man named Orrin Slade. Mr. Slade lost his notary commission 2 years ago for processing fraudulent deeds. This document is a federal crime. She flinched at the word crime, but didn't look up. If we walk into the regional bank's fraud department today and hand this over, Caden leaned forward, his voice dropping an octave, they will immediately void your affidavit. The liability will transfer entirely to Garrett and Orrin Slade. But I need you to confirm, right here and now, that Garrett forced you to sign that retroactive affidavit under the threat of abandonment and legal ruin. The room was deathly quiet. I watched her throat swallow hard. He told me I would go to prison, she whispered, her voice barely audible. He said the gym business was registered under my home address, and that made me liable. He said if I didn't tell the auditor I signed the loan, he would leave that night and let the feds arrest me. Caden wrote furiously on a legal pad. Classic coercion. It's textbook. We can work with this. He set his pen down and looked at me. I've already scheduled an emergency meeting with the bank's regional risk manager and their internal legal counsel for 10:30 a.m. We're taking these documents straight to them. What happens to the house? I asked. If the bank concedes the primary loan document was forged and you were extorted into the affidavit, the debt is completely decoupled from the property, Caden explained. The house remains free and clear in your mother's name, but they will immediately contact the FBI to initiate a wire fraud investigation on Garrett. The bank wants their $150,000 back, and they will hunt him to the ends of the earth to get it. I looked at my mother. She was finally free of him. The house was safe. My dad's legacy was secure. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out. It was Deputy Bowen. Excuse me, I said to Caden, stepping out into the narrow hallway of the clinic to answer it. Deputy? We pulled the footage, Bowen said flatly. And it's a mess, Bowen sighed. The cameras are cheap, low-resolution garbage, but we got a clear shot of the guy climbing the chain-link fence at 4:15 p.m. Did you get his face? No, Bowen said. He had his hood pulled tight, but he wasn't wearing a gray hoodie like you described. I frowned. What was he wearing? A vintage brown leather aviator jacket, Bowen said. My blood turned to ice water. I looked down at the duffel bag I had brought with me from Kit's apartment, currently sitting by the clinic's front door. Stuffed inside it was the only thing I had taken from the house when Garrett kicked me out 4 years ago. My dad's old leather jacket. Connor didn't just steal the baseball bat. When he broke into my car to get my address a week ago, when he found out I was staying on Beacon Hill, he must have taken the jacket too. He didn't just vandalize a plane. He was wearing the exact piece of clothing every single person at the airfield associated exclusively with me. I closed my eyes, leaning heavily against the painted brick wall of the clinic hallway. Connor hadn't just broken into my car for an address. He had taken the one physical thing that connected me to my dad, and he was using it as a costume to send me to jail. Deputy, I said, my voice dropping to a harsh, steady whisper. He broke into my car 3 days ago. I didn't report it because I thought he just grabbed some loose change and a phone charger. But that jacket belongs to me. It's a 1980s bomber. If you look closely at that footage, you'll see it's way too big for him. It hangs off his shoulders. I did notice the sleeves were rolled up, Bowen conceded, the skepticism bleeding out of his tone, and I just got off the phone with the logistics center. Your time cards are solid. Plus, my dispatcher just verified you're currently standing inside a legal aid clinic downtown, so you know it wasn't me swinging that bat. I know you've got an ironclad alibi, Bowen replied, but I still have a wrecked $500,000 airplane, and I need to find the kid in the oversized jacket. Where would he go? Does he have friends in the area? He doesn't have friends, I said, and Garrett kicked him out last night. He has absolutely zero money. He's going to go back to the one place he thinks he can still hide, which is my mother's house in Seattle, I told him, giving Bowen the exact street address. He doesn't have a key, but check the detached garage in the alley. The side window doesn't latch properly. He knows how to jimmy it open. I'll have Seattle PD send a unit to check the property, Bowen said. Keep your phone on. I hung up and walked back into Caden's office. My mother was wiping her eyes with a tissue. Caden was organizing the forged documents into a pristine stack. We need to go to the bank right now, I said, grabbing my duffel bag from the floor, before Garrett realizes he left a paper trail and tries to do something stupid. The meeting at the regional bank headquarters was clinical and brutally efficient. We sat in a glass-walled conference room with the bank's regional risk manager, a sharp, unsmiling woman named Elena, and their internal legal counsel. Caden didn't waste time with grandstanding. He slid the forged HELOC contract, the suspended notary's disciplinary record, and the time-stamped bakery photo across the polished mahogany table. Elena looked at the documents in silence for a long time. She cross-referenced the notary stamp with a database on her laptop. Then she looked at my mother, who sat perfectly still, her hands trembling in her lap. Ma'am, Elena asked, her voice entirely devoid of warmth, are you prepared to state on the record that your husband threatened you with criminal liability to force you into signing yesterday's affidavit? My mother swallowed hard. She looked at me, then back at Elena. Yes, she whispered. He told me he would leave me to take the fall for his business. He was standing right behind my chair. The bank's lawyer sighed quietly and closed his legal pad. They knew exactly what they were looking at. A $150,000 loan backed by a fraudulent signature and a coerced affidavit was a toxic asset. If they tried to force a foreclosure on the house, Caden would drag them into a massive public lawsuit that would expose their auditing failures. The lien against the property will be released by end of business today, Elena stated flatly, tapping her manicured nails against the table. The home equity line of credit will be decoupled from the physical address and reclassified as an unsecured, fraudulent debt tied strictly to Garrett's social security number. We will be forwarding this entire file to the FBI's Financial Crimes Division this afternoon. Your husband is looking at federal wire fraud charges. We walked out of the bank 40 minutes later. The overcast sky had broken, letting a few sharp rays of late morning sun cut through the gray Seattle clouds. Caden shook my hand on the sidewalk. You did good, kid. I'll file the paperwork to lift your mechanic's lien this afternoon. The title to the house is officially free and clear. It's all hers. I thanked him, put my mother in the passenger seat of my Civic, and drove north. She didn't say a word the entire drive. The manic desperation was gone, replaced by a profound, hollow exhaustion. She had finally realized that the man she sacrificed me for had viewed her as nothing more than collateral. As we turned onto our street, I saw the flashing blue and red lights. 2 King County Sheriff's cruisers were parked at at steep angles in the alley behind the house. I parked on the street and walked up the driveway, my mother trailing nervously behind me. Deputy Bowen was standing by the side door of the detached garage, talking to a Seattle PD officer. When he saw me, he nodded and pointed toward the back of the nearest cruiser. Connor was sitting in the back seat, handcuffed behind his back. His face was pressed against the reinforced glass. He looked terrified, pale, and incredibly small. He wasn't smirking, he wasn't entitled. He was just a criminal who had finally run out of other people's money to hide behind. You called it, Bowen said, walking over to meet us. We found him asleep on the concrete floor inside the garage. He had to kick the window frame in to get inside. It's a clear-cut breaking and entering, on top of the felony vandalism at the airfield. Did you find the jacket? I asked. Bowen gestured to a large plastic evidence bag sitting on the trunk of the cruiser. Inside, folded neatly, was my dad's brown leather aviator jacket. He was using it as a blanket, Bowen said. It's tagged as evidence for the vandalism charge, but I'll make sure the prosecutor knows it's stolen property. You'll get it back as soon as the case clears. I looked at the bag, feeling a massive, crushing weight lift off my chest. The jacket was safe. The house was safe. Is Garrett? My mother started to ask, her voice wavering as she looked at the police cars. He's not here, ma'am, Bowen said. But based on the radio chatter I'm hearing from downtown, I imagine he's going to have federal marshals looking for him very soon. Bowen gave me a brief nod, got into his cruiser, and backed out of the alley. The Seattle PD unit followed. I stood in the driveway with my mother. The house was completely silent. The manicured lawn, the front porch my dad had built, the heavy oak front door, it all looked exactly the same as it did 4 years ago. But the rot inside had been entirely excised. Garrett was a fugitive who would spend the rest of his life looking over his shoulder. Connor was going to state prison. It's over, I told her, turning to face her. The title is clear. The bank isn't going to foreclose. You can sell it, you can stay. It's completely up to you. She stood on the concrete driveway, clutching her purse. She looked at the house, then looked at me. Her eyes were filled with a complicated mix of deep shame and lingering grief. Where are you going to go? She asked, her voice cracking. Your room is. It's still exactly how you left it. You don't have to sleep on a couch. I looked at the house. I thought about the 14 months after my dad died, the crushing grief, the way she had looked firmly at the floor when Garrett told me I was a financial ghost. I had spent 4 years becoming a machine, surviving off cold coffee, 10-hour shifts, and pure concentrated spite, just to ensure my father's legacy wasn't pawned off to cover their mistakes. I had saved the house because my dad built it, not because I wanted to live in it. I'm not staying, I said, my voice calm and perfectly steady. I have a shift at the logistics center tonight, and I need to be at the airfield early tomorrow. She took a half step forward, reaching out a trembling hand. Please, I'm so sorry. I was just so scared of being alone. You are alone now, I said simply. But you're safe. You're resilient. You'll land on your feet. I didn't wait for her to reply. I turned around, walked down the driveway, and got into my car. I didn't look in the rearview mirror as I drove away. 2 weeks later, the morning air was crisp and painfully clear. I was standing on the tarmac at the municipal airfield, a heavy cup of black coffee in my hand. Dad's Piper Navajo was still in the hangar, currently being gutted and rewired by an insurance crew, but the rest of the flight line was buzzing with activity. Arlo walked out of the dispatch office, a clipboard tucked under his arm. He tossed a set of keys toward me. I caught them out of the air. Cessna 172, parked in slot 4. Arlo grunted, not looking up from his paperwork. Tanks are full. Wind is 5 knots out of the north. Get your pre-flight done, kid. We've got commercial multi-engine maneuvers to log today. I looked at the keys in my hand. I didn't have the $75,000 my dad had saved for me. I didn't have a safety net. I didn't have a family. But as I walked across the cracked concrete toward the aircraft, the morning sun catching the aluminum wings, I realized I had exactly what my father always wanted for me. Absolute independence. I opened the door to the cockpit, climbed into the left seat, and started the engine.